As I said earlier, we recruit foreign spies. We recruit people who have access to privileged or classified or sensitive information in order to give the United States a peek at what these other countries or organizations, because it's not always a country we're working against, but sometimes it may be an organization like organized crime or terrorists or people like that. We need sources of information, sources of intelligence, and my job was to recruit those human sources inside those organizations. So I would convince them to join my team. And that's how I think they psychologically cope with the fact that they are betraying their old team. In fact, they're joining a new team.
But everyone, or every law graduate, who was trained as a lawyer and somehow graduated that law school would say, maybe I should go to law, or I pursue prosecution, or maybe try to be a judge one day or do in the legal field. Why did you take yourself out of that and say CIA would be my calling?
That's a great question, Ahmed.
Hello and afternoon or good morning, wherever you are. I don't know what time it is in your time zone. This is the Jurist Podcast, and today we have James Lawler. Good morning, Jim.
Good morning, Ahmed. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. And I want to thank you very much for allowing us to have you here. And this is a very special episode and very special topic, because you have been an operations officer for the CIA for how long? 25 years?
25 years, and I've taught human tradecraft for almost another 20.
Wow, that's very interesting, and I'm very happy to host you today in our podcast. And I have a few questions for you. But before that, do you have something to introduce yourself in a different way at the moment?
Well, I was born in Houston, Texas. I joined the CIA in 1980 after I got out of Rice University for my undergraduate program and University of Texas School of Law for my legal program, and passed the Texas bar. And anyways, I actually came across the CIA my last year of law school in 1976. I was interviewing with various law firms. And so the CIA came to the University of Texas School of Law looking for attorneys, because like any large organization, we need attorneys to either keep us out of trouble or get us out of trouble. And I interviewed with a gentleman named Mr. Bill Wood. We got about 2 minutes into the interview, and he said, "Jim, have you ever thought about the clandestine service?" And I said, "I'm not sure what the clandestine service is." And he said, "Well, I can't tell you much about it, but I think you'd be good at this." So I was curious about that, and I took the application home. But that night, reality hit me like a cold towel in the head, because my wife's mother was very ill, and there was no way we were going to be moving away from Texas to Washington, D.C., and then thousands of miles overseas. It wasn't going to happen. So the next day, with considerable sadness, I returned the application and said the timing was not right. And so instead of going to work way back in 1976 for the CIA, I instead went to work for a family business. And I don't know how many of your viewers or listeners have ever been in family businesses, but I bet you I can guess why they're no longer in a family business. And it's usually the F word, family. And yeah, I was working with my dad and my two brothers, and I loved them, but the work was extremely boring. I was running a metal components company, steel buildings in Texas, making a lot of money. In fact, I managed to triple sales in about 3 years. But it just was not psychologically satisfying. And I would come home at night and complain to my wife that I was really frustrated, that this was just not my life's calling. And so after so much of this, she finally said, "Jim, look, either do something about it or stop your complaining." Well, by then her mom had passed away a couple of years earlier. And so I had kept Mr. Bill Wood's card, and I wrote him a letter. and said, we talked 3.5 years ago and timing was not right, but now it is. And I'd like to pursue that opportunity you spoke to me about. And 3 days later, I received a phone call at my office, and a young woman said, Mr. Wood received your letter. Could you meet him next Thursday at 3 p.m. in the Holiday Inn's lobby out on the Gulf Freeway? And I said, yes, ma'am, I can. That conversation took about 20 seconds. She never said the letters CIA. But I went to that meeting, and he and I spoke for about 2 hours. And he said, I'd like to fly you to Washington in a couple of weeks for some testing. So I flew to Washington, had about 3 days worth of testing, came back, and about 2 or 3 months later, I was asked to come back for a second round of testing, including the notorious polygraph test, which some people mistakenly call a lie detector test. It is not. It's a stress detector. And I jokingly call it sometimes a colonoscopy of the soul. But I passed. I went through the polygraph test. I went through the exam with the agency psychologists and psychiatrists. And amazingly, a few weeks later, they called me up and said, Mr. Lawler, we'd like to offer you a job as a GS-11 operations officer, or the same thing as a case officer. Now, the bizarre thing, Ahmed, is that I had no idea what a CIA operations officer did. But I was so frustrated with that job there in Houston, Texas, running that company. I said, I'll take it. So my wife and I moved to Washington, D.C., and on February the 19th, 1980, I began my career as a CIA operations officer. And I soon learned exactly what they expected of me. They expected me to manipulate people, to exploit people, to subvert people, to suborn people, to convince people to commit espionage, to become traitors to their country. And I found out that not only was I pretty good at it, but I enjoyed the hell out of it. So that's probably something about my nature.
That takes me to my next question, which was like, your life calling was not working in a family business. I understood that did not make you happy, and for some extent even made you a bit sad. What everyone, or what every law graduate, okay, who was trained as a lawyer and somehow graduated that law school would say, okay, maybe I should go to law, or I pursue prosecution, or maybe try to be a judge one day, or do in the legal field. Why did you take yourself out of that and say CIA would be my calling?
That's a great question, Ahmed. I don't know. I did fine in law school. I think if I had pursued a legal career, I would have liked to have been maybe a criminal defense attorney or a prosecutor, something where the stakes are really high and where I could use maybe my communication skills. But I didn't really consider that at the time. There was something about the CIA's mystique. Also, I had a strong feeling of patriotism towards the United States. And my family has always had a tradition of military service. And my great-grandfather, in fact, was a general in the Union Army under General U.S. Grant. And so I felt compelled to do something for America. And so that's why I didn't really pursue, a different career legally. And a lot of my law school classmates, I've kept in touch with several of them, and they've all probably made, 5, 10, 20 times as much money as I have. But I can tell you this, I've probably had 20 times as much fun.
That's actually very interesting. And I can imagine, the thrill out of working for intelligence in the US at that time, I can imagine is quite high. But can you tell me a little bit more into details? What does a CIA operations officer do?
Well, as I said earlier, we recruit foreign spies. We recruit people who have access to privileged or classified or sensitive information.
Wow.
In order to give the United States a peek at what these other countries or organizations, because it's not always a country we're working against, but sometimes it may be an organization like organized crime or terrorists or people like that. And so we need sources of information, sources of intelligence, and my job was to recruit those human sources inside those organizations. So I would convince them to join my team. And that's how I think they psychologically cope with the fact that they are betraying their old team. In fact, they're joining a new team. And I have found that, the various motivations for espionage, that ego is probably the strongest. And when I say ego, I mean people feel like they've been disrespected or mistreated. They've been, passed over for promotion. They feel it's been unfair, and they feel like the organization or their country has betrayed them first. And so all they're doing is evening the score.
What was it? The geographical places where it was assigned to you? Because many countries have successful careers or successful future for their people, or at least it seems like it, like, I don't know, from the UK or from neighboring countries. And I know, did you only recruit in Middle East or, poor countries, for example, in Africa or Asia?
Well, I recruited, I think, virtually almost any nationality I was going after. Most of my tours, my operational tours, were in Europe, but I traveled a lot to meet people. And, of course, Europe has a huge percentage of people from all over the world, from Africa, Latin America, the Middle East, from the former Soviet Union, from Asia, from China. I was what we call a generalist. That means I would go after virtually any target. And that was my focus up until about halfway through my career. And then I became much more focused on preventing the spread of weapons of mass destruction, especially nuclear weapons or biological weapons. And I became a specialist in that. And so that dominated the last half of my career. And I was able to figure out how to recruit technical people, scientists, what we call proliferators, people trying to sell weapons of mass destruction to other countries.
Is it difficult to, I believe it's, of course, very difficult, but what I'm saying is it different maybe hiring a spy from a European nationality than an Asian one or Middle Eastern, for example?
You have to be attuned to the cultural differences, but the same human emotions and needs are in everybody. People maybe hate their boss, and I don't care where they're from. They may have a real problem with their boss or the leader of their organization, the leader of whatever. They may be jealous. They may have family crises, and everybody has family crises. And I like to say, never once did I recruit a happy person. You don't recruit happy people. You recruit unhappy people. And I can guarantee you there are unhappy people all over the world. They're in the Middle East, they're in Latin America, they're in Asia, wherever. And my ability, my talent was spotting people who were under stress and then offering them a way to relieve the stress. But yeah, you have to be attuned to the cultural differences. And you also have to appreciate the fact that they may not like the ruling party in their country, but they may like the fact of their country. It's classic that if you go after a senior Chinese official, he may in fact hate his boss. He may hate the Chinese Communist Party, but he loves China. So you have to be, really sensitive to that these people, they like their family history and things like that, but they may have a grievance, and that's where I come in.
I like very much what you said, that there are unhappy people everywhere, which means that the sky is the limit. Almost everybody who is unhappy is a target. And
absolutely. In fact, I say everybody, if they're given enough unhappiness, they're recruitable. So,
wow.
And that's really scary. But okay, so I'll give you an example, if you want, of my first major recruitment. Okay, so I was on my first operational tour overseas, and a case officer's career can make or break on that first tour. You're expected to go out and recruit spies. Well, my whole first year in this particular country, in this city, I hadn't recruited anybody, and I was having serious doubts as to my abilities and whether I was really cut out for this line of work or not. And then I received a classified message from CIA headquarters that said that a year from then, we were going to be engaged in some very, very high-stake national security negotiations with a certain foreign country. And therefore, if you CIA officers know anybody from this country with the following access, and they outlined the type of access such a person would have to have, then please increase your what we call developmental activities, basically assessing and developing the target to see what kind of vulnerabilities there are, and is there potential for recruiting this person as a spy. As it turns out, I had been in a ski class with an individual from this country who actually fit the qualifications exactly. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to go after this guy. So I started, intensifying what we call the developmental activities, dinners together, family dinners, trying to build up the degree of trust, because trust is the foundation of any human relationship, and especially in espionage. And I wanted to get a look at what vulnerabilities might this man have? What could I do to persuade him to commit espionage? Okay, so as I said earlier, I was a first tour officer. I was barely, I think, 29 years old, and I was very naive. I thought that I could recruit this man who had become a genuine friend of mine simply on our friendship and on the force of my personality and powers of persuasion. Well, that's very naive. Just because you and I are friends, Ahmed, doesn't mean that I can say, Ahmed, how would you like to commit espionage? And then offer you a handsome consulting fee. Well, I wrote to headquarters and I set out this proposal, how I could recruit this man. And I'm sure my outline was pretty sketchy. I mean, I had nothing. I didn't know this guy had any stress or anything like this. It was really terribly naive. But headquarters back home in Langley, they were very desperate, and they approved my stupid scheme. So I took this guy to dinner, and I pitched him to become a spy for the United States, and in return, I would pay him a nice monthly consulting fee. And he looked at me, and he said, Jim, you and I are friends, but what you're proposing, that would be morally wrong. Now, Ahmed, I've pitched probably 60 people in my career. He's the only person to ever pose a moral objection. Why do you think most people would turn you down? Any idea?
Could be afraid.
There you go. That's it exactly. It's fear. Fear of getting caught. And in fact, I pitched an African intelligence officer, and he said, Jim, they hang people in my country for doing things like that. And he's right, they would. But then he surprised me, this African intelligence officer, because he said, could I have a rain check? And I said, what? He said, yeah, a rain check. I have a son who's going to be, he's only 3 years old now, but in 15 years, he'll be university age, and then I might need you. Well, I wrote that down, and 15 years later, this guy was posted to Washington, and Africa Division asked me if I thought he was sincere. I said, yep. And I can tell you that rain check was cashed in 15 years later. But let's go back to my first failure. My first guy I've pitched. He's turned me down. And I went home that night after that dinner, and I was, sad. And then I recalled a saying that we have in my organization that it's okay to be turned down, but not turned in. What if he complains to his ambassador that young Mr. James Lawler just pitched him to commit espionage, And by the way, I didn't mention the fact that the man I pitched was the number 2 man in his embassy. He was the deputy chief of mission. So he was the ambassador's deputy. And I thought, oh my God. And that foreign ambassador had a bad reputation for being a real hothead. And in my mind's eye, I could see him storming into our ambassador's office and lodging a very, very loud diplomatic protest against me for the outrageous thing that I had just done, trying to proposition his deputy to become a spy, to become a traitor. That was all in my imagination. And I thought, and I bet CIA headquarters is going to cut me loose. Even though they approved my doing this, they're going to wonder, how did Jim screw this up? So this is all going through my head. And finally, after about 3 days, I got up the courage to call him just to see if we were still friends. And I was relieved that he didn't hang up in my ear. And all I said was, you know, we had a good time last Friday. I was thinking maybe we'd go out again this coming Friday night and do it again. And to my great relief, he said, you know, Jim, I was thinking the same thing. So I went to this second dinner a week later with only one goal, and that was to smooth any turbulent waters that were out there. I was thinking maybe I could say, apologize, beg for forgiveness, say that clearly, I didn't mean to insult him.
It was a misunderstanding, or you understand it wrong, everything.
All this stuff. I mean, I was ready to basically throw myself at the mercy of the court. And so we got to the restaurant. This is 1 week later. Got to the restaurant, the waiter dropped the menus off, and after the waiter walked away, the first words out of my friend's mouth, Jim, that offer you made me last Friday, is that still good? And I said, well, yeah, we're friends. That's why I made the offer. And he said, well, what you don't know was 2 days after that dinner, my wife announced that she wants a divorce, and I can't afford to pay her the alimony to which she's entitled, and put my 2 high school age boys in private schools when we go home next summer, and they have to be in a private school or they won't get a good education. I can't do that unless I accept your offer. So there's I'm sure you remember this, Ahmed, there's a saying in law school that if the judge rules in your favor, shut up and get out of court quickly. And so I shook his hand, and a couple of days later, he brought me a big stack of classified material, must have been 4 or 5 inches thick. And he said, now I'm going to tell you why I'm really doing this. He said, I hate my boss. My ambassador steals credit for everything I do and everything everybody else does in our embassy. And I hate the guy. And as I hand you this classified material, it's as if I'm kicking that son of a bitch in the face. So I took it from him and I said, we're on the same team now. Let's kick the son of a bitch again. Bring me some more of this. And he was, it was basically, he felt like he had been betrayed first, which he had, because the ambassador was, treating him like dirt and taking credit for everything he did. And so I found out that revenge is one of those pure motivations for espionage. He was wonderful. He did, by the way, go back to his home country, and he provided us not only all of their negotiating positions, but all of their fallback positions. And I know, Ahmed, you've done a lot of big business deals, and I'm sure you would love to know what the other side, what their fallback positions are, the point where they would walk away. And it was estimated that his intelligence for us saved the United States billions of dollars. So that was how crucial that was. But, if I had not pitched the guy at the first meeting, he wouldn't have volunteered at the second meeting. Now, I was fortunate, and I became a kind of a student of stressors in people's lives.
I'm trying to grasp my head around these ideas. So unhappy, I'm reading Revengers, people who are less afraid, or they have a reason for it, probably financial reason as well. Maybe if the moral aspect is not as strong as they think, because this, for example, this example was, the first meeting was a moral reason, but in reality, did not stand too long after his boss was, continued to be a bad guy, as well as his wife as well brought him one more reason by the divorce. So qualities that you've been looking for in all these recruits are based on their emotional stability and their life circumstances.
That's exactly it. And I've never been through a divorce myself, but our son went through a divorce, and it's probably the most psychologically, emotional, and financially tumultuous time in your life. And that puts you under enormous stress. And in fact, it was kind of interesting, but in a short time period, I recruited 3 targets, 3 people going through divorces, and headquarters jokingly referred to me as Dr. Divorce. So I helped these people out, but they were adrift in an emotional sea, a very turbulent emotional sea, and I was there giving them a life ring to save them. And that's why they would then justify themselves why they were doing it, because only somebody who's a pure psychopath or narcissist would do this just to do it. These people, they felt like they'd been dissed. They felt like they'd been disrespected, that they were desperate for money for whatever reason. And by the way, nobody ever does this for money alone. Nobody. There's always underlying reasons. They may need the money, in his case, for the alimony, for the fact to put his boys in private schools. Some people have gambling debts. Some people have illnesses and they need medical assistance. Some people may need educational assistance for their children or grandchildren, but they don't do it for money by itself. That's a myth. That is a real myth. In fact, we have an acronym, MICE, MICE. Supposedly, those are the 4 major reasons for committing espionage. The M is for money, and I say that's not a reason. The I is for ideology. Now, there are some people who will say, I hate communism, or I hate nuclear weapons, and I love freedom and democracy. And I'm sure they're telling the truth, but a lot of times that ideological reason is window dressing on a deeper reason that's underneath. Now, the C in MICE is coercion. And the Russians and the Chinese use that all the time. Blackmail, a honey trap, swallows, as they call it, or some kind of other blackmail. I don't like using that for a very good reason. And it's not a moral reason. It's simply that I don't want a rattlesnake in the backseat of my car who feels compelled to work with me under threat, because he will bite you in the end. And finally, the strongest reason is the E in MICE, and that's ego. And that means, again, you feel like you've been disrespected. Whatever reason, it all comes back to a lot to ego. That's, to me, the most powerful reason why people commit espionage.
In the legal field in general, whenever we have a dispute or a conflict, we understand very well that first reason that the parties come up with about the conflict is not really the truth. In many ways, it starts with a conflict about money or an unpaid invoice, or sometimes, a default in the obligations in one of the contracts. But then we realize that the underlying reason for the conflict is not actually the obligations that were breached in a way or the other. And there is the emotional part of it, and ego is one of them. And actually money is not always the major part. So I completely understand and agree with you. This question is not about them now, it's about you, because I need to understand, how did you actually deal with your targets? Have you ever thought of them as assets, victims, or targets? Because I have these 3 terms on my head.
We call them assets. I've used the term target earlier, not in the sense of trying to shoot somebody, but in the sense of trying to recruit somebody. Assets, yes. I mean, I looked upon them literally as team members. I wanted to treat them well. I always treated my assets, the contacts, the spies that I recruited very well, both emotionally, psychologically, and I became their therapist. I had at least one asset who once said, "Jim, when you're talking to me, it's as if my brain is in a warm waterbed." And that's what I want them to relax and share with me everything, so that they would tell me things they won't tell their lovers, they won't tell their spouse, their closest friend, but they felt trust and they could share things with me. So that to me is the kind of relationship I wanted with my assets. I pitched a key member of a nuclear weapons network, and that night, his wife asked him, he agreed to do what I said. And that night, his wife asked him why in the world he's doing this. And the next day, he told me that his wife had asked him that. And he said, "I told her because I trust Jim." And that's it, that fact that he trusted me. I will absolutely keep all my promises. And we always do. We will keep our commitments to our assets. And that's a very powerful motivation, knowing that they're part of a team where we'll go to hell and back to get them out of trouble if it comes to that.
No, I understand that the friendly connection or the recruiter connection between you must stay very strong. Otherwise, he wouldn't trust you that much to do it, and he wouldn't trust you that much to keep doing it, which means that giving you all these information. I have a question that I will wait until the end to ask you about it. But now just something came up to my mind. I heard a lot that even friendly countries or allies recruit spies from each other. So I don't know, US, Israel, Egypt, and neighboring countries like from Africa and so on. What I understand is that the work of spies or the work of the intelligence in general has no borders and has no restriction. Is that true?
Mostly true. There are exceptions. You may have heard of what we call the Five Eyes. Or if not, I'll tell you exactly what the Five Eyes. The Five Eyes are the countries, our country, the United States, Great Britain, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. And we have an agreement among ourselves not to recruit each other's citizens. So, but with that exception, yes, we recruit virtually any other country's citizens. And some people like to say there are no friendly liaison services. Well, that's not quite true. But we want sources to tell us, what's their negotiating position. What are their plans and intentions? A lot of people think that we can get everything off the internet or using cyber tools. We can, if we get inside your computer, Ahmed, we can tell what your law firm is doing. Well, yes, but I don't know what's going on in your head. And so unless I recruit you or an associate, you may disregard what's in the computer and do your strategy may be something else and what your plans and intentions are. So you're right. We do recruit people in a lot of foreign countries. The exceptions would be the Five Eyes. They have agreed not to recruit our citizens. We agree not to recruit theirs, unless we give permission, of course. Because maybe I know a New Zealander that has particular access, so we would go to the New Zealand Security Service and ask for permission, and they may grant it, but they don't have to.
And this gives, for example, this exception to recruit on their land, but not against them, of course.
Well, it wouldn't be against them, no. I mean, they wouldn't give us permission if let's say New Zealand and the United States was negotiating a treaty. We're not going to go after their people. No.
Of course.
It's an agreement not to use our intelligence services against one another, but to work in tandem, to work together. You
Right.
mentioned Israel earlier. You think there are times where Israel has spied on us. The famous Jonathan Pollard case. There's others. In fact, frequently Israel is one of our highest counterintelligence threats because they're trying to recruit American citizens a lot of times. And by the way, I say this: I have a lot of Israeli friends. I worked with Mossad in the past, but I have to be careful because their geostrategic position and their goals do not always match ours. You can see this right now during the Iran conflict, where they have a different goal than we do. And of course, it's if you were them and you were facing Iran, which is an existential challenge, well, maybe you'd do the same thing. So we have to be aware of that.
There are some literature or I don't know, do you read the novels that the US have a spy in every major city in the world? Doesn't matter where, it doesn't matter how many on ground, but at least enough resources for the US everywhere. Is this true?
I wish that were true. If we don't have spies or assets, we may have friendly people that are occasional contacts. That doesn't mean they're on our payroll. It doesn't mean that we call them sources, but they may be friends who, for whatever reason, would tell us what's going on, and that because they feel either friendly towards the United States or maybe towards the CIA. And we, of course, use those relationships, but they may not be what we call responsive assets. Just because they are willing to give us information occasionally doesn't mean that they're really working for us all the time. Now, my job, of course, was to recruit the people to be absolutely spies for us. But sometimes we just have people that are, believe in what the United States is doing, or for whatever reason. It could be a good reason or a bad reason, but they want to tell us things. People like to talk. You wouldn't believe how many people that I would go to lunch with, and they would say, "Jim, I shouldn't tell you this," and then they'd start telling me something. And
that happened a lot to me.
Yeah, my talent is that I'm a very good listener.
Yeah. So. You mentioned something in your conversation right now. You said maybe friends to US or friendly to the US, and then you followed that by maybe friendly to CIA. Is there a difference?
People, going back to World War II, when Alan Dulles was the OSS guy in Switzerland, and many years later I was in Switzerland, and basically I had inherited a lot of his contacts. And, the CIA is a very, very powerful organization. And so people frequently like to be associated with a powerful, mysterious organization. There's a mystique to it. There's a feeling of being in the in crowd. If you've got a friend who's a CIA officer, and we would do favors for them too. I mean, powerful organizations where we could give them a tip off that maybe they have an account holder in a certain bank, and we know that person is connected to organized crime or to terrorism, and that would be terribly embarrassing to their bank. And so they would, thank us, and they see it within their business to basically have a good relationship, not just with the United States, but also specifically with the CIA.
Why do we still need, to be very honest, what you said, it makes a lot of sense. You said that also people talk all the time and they love to talk. And now what I see from the online behavior, online social media, people document not just their life, they document the cities they work in, they document their company, everything. So there's crazy amount of content online. Why do we need to still recruit and hire people to tell us what's going on? Because I think with an AI agent who's going to be screening what they see online from all these influencers and corporate documentation of everything online, you can read what's going on land.
You can do that to a certain extent. In fact, a few months ago, a Stanford University professor and a retired military general, an Army general, they asked me about how artificial intelligence was going to affect human recruiting. And I said, I think artificial intelligence basically scooping up everything out there on the internet about people. It could be social media, it could be public records, it could be even our classified holdings. If I knew everything that's available about a target, their financial worries, their grievances, their relationships with their boss, if they're accepted in their own group, if we knew all of that, it would be a very, very powerful targeting mechanism to tell us who's under stress. Here's the stresses in a certain person's life. And if we had that, and then it could spell it out, like AI does, here are the possible stress points. Here's the possible ways you can relieve that stress. And it presents that to the ops officer. That would be a marvelous targeting tool. But what AI will not do is it's not going to sit across from you, Ahmed, and say, Ahmed, okay, now, and pitch you. It can't do that. And I don't think it'll ever replace a human case officer who sits across from you and says, okay, Ahmed, let's discuss your future. Where do you see yourself 5 years from now? And I used to use that line. Where do you see yourself 5 years from now? And people would talk about their dreams, their hopes, their frustrations, and things. And yeah, AI could do it mechanically, but you're not looking me in the eye. You don't feel that feeling of human compassion, human understanding. People sometimes ask me, Jim, what are the qualities of a top class case officer? And I said, the first quality is curiosity. I'm extremely curious about people. I'd love to sit with you, Ahmed, and just talk about your life as an attorney there in the UAE and, why you decided to go the law career. I'm not asking you that for any reason other. I'm just curious. Secondly, keen listening ability. Absolutely. You don't recruit people when you're talking. You recruit people when you're listening. The third quality is what I call extreme empathy, to put myself inside your head or my target's head so I know what it feels like to be you. The fourth quality is patience. Sometimes we're impatient. Some of my recruitment pitches that didn't materialize were because I was impatient. I didn't do it long enough. One time it took me 10 years to recruit one person. 10 years.
10 years?
10 years. The first 9.5 years, that person was not under stress and didn't need me. And then, wow, his life fell apart. The fifth quality is persistence. Just keep going back, going back. The sixth quality is creativity. The seventh quality is being a careful observer of stressors in people's lives. The eighth quality is a little controversial because I call it ruthlessness. Now, ruthlessness is a harsh term, but by that I mean a mediocre or poor case officer fears rejection. Well, I tell my students, if you've never had a recruitment pitch rejected, you haven't pitched enough people. You've got to not fear rejection, and you've got to remember why you're doing this. And then the ninth quality is having a powerful or persuasive personality. And the 10th quality is rather paranormal. I call it a mastery of the metaphysics, because in my opinion, a top-class operations officer is able to put like an invisible neural link in the target's mind. Suddenly, you and I are no longer here. We're in another plane of existence, and fires and bombs could be going off, and neither one of us would know it. It's not hypnosis. It's much more than hypnosis. It's like an invisible neural link that I put in people's head. Now, could it be that I'm just imagining that? Maybe. But if that's what gives me self-confidence, and confidence is basically everything in a recruitment pitch, then fine. But I've had other case officers who've said I've experienced that as well.
Wow. That's quite, I think this recipe works for a lot of success, not just in recruiting spies, I think.
It would be great in your business. I mean, basically, to be able to face another attorney to in a negotiation or face a jury, face a judge, and you are convincing them that you are right.
Yeah, I mean, I can relate to a lot of these qualities, and thinking about the in general, there are some common traits of successful people, whether they're working in one field or the other. It's all the same. Patience. I read here, careful, listener, curious, empathy, patience, persistence, and creativity. I think if you apply these to many other professions, you would probably be very successful. I'll go back to the espionage and the recruiting spies a bit, because that is a very interesting topic for me. How do you see the future of this? Because when I'm seeing that, I think that the 80s and the 90s and the movies have described it very well. What was it? That just simple information was needed because there's not access to much information. But with the explosion of information and data that we have today, how do you see this as a service will evolve in the future?
Well, we're going to, as I said earlier, we're going to use much more artificial intelligence for scooping up information and putting it together. But again, it's not going to be doing recruitment pitches. Naturally, we use a lot of cyber tools to go after other people's computers, signals intelligence to listen into their cell phones. But there's also disinformation out there that we've got to be careful about. Some people deliberately, some countries deliberately put out disinformation to lead us down the wrong path. And so we always have to have a strong body of very smart analysts to analyze all the information that collectors. I'm what you would call a collector. I collect the information. I can do a certain amount of analysis, but you really need somebody who really knows the country or the region, or let's take the Iranian nuclear weapons program. I'm not a physicist, but I know how a nuclear weapon works, and we have people that we call targeters who look at the entire Iranian nuclear weapons program, and they can tell you who the key scientists are. Have we met these scientists before at conferences or trade shows or somewhere? What do we know about these people? Do some of them have relatives in the United States? A lot of them have been American educated. Do they have good feelings about the United States? Maybe they're working on the nuclear weapons program because they have no choice. And so we're a good targeting officer and analyst will tell you, here's the people that we really need for, say, defeating or stopping the Iranians from having nuclear weapons. Sometimes it's people that don't immediately occur to you. There's people that we call health physicists. Now, they're the ones who can tell you where all the nuclear weapons are because you can't place them very close together. Fissile material, you don't want to place it close together or it will spontaneously fission. So they know exactly where all of the nuclear weapons are, and at least the highly enriched uranium or the plutonium is. And sometimes you don't ask the right question. For instance, I ran a source from a certain country's nuclear weapons program, and he was an engineer, very nice guy. And one time he said, "Jim, you've never asked me what my wife does." I thought, "No, I haven't." I said, "Well, what does your wife do?" "She's a nuclear weapons designer." I thought, okay. You see, I was being very sexist in the sense that I didn't think his wife had an important job. Turns out she had a much more important job than him. But yeah, I think I told you, Ahmed, that sometimes asking the right question is more important than having the right answer, because unless you ask the right question, you won't get the right answer.
That's very much true. I'm just talking to you and I'm thinking treason in general is a very serious crime. In most jurisdiction in most countries that apply the death penalty, for example, that gets the death penalty if someone is found to be working as a spy or been recruited. I just can't imagine how hard is it to sell this or to pitch someone to recruit them. What was the argument for those who are afraid?
That I will do everything within my power to protect them. I can't give them a 100% guarantee because that would be a lie. And sometimes people say, well, CIA officers are professional liars. I don't lie to people. I'm not going to do that. That would be unethical for me. There are ethics in espionage, and I'm not going to overpromise. But what I can promise them is that if you do exactly what I say, I will go to hell and back, and my organization will go to hell and back to rescue you and get you out of trouble. That's not a guarantee. Sometimes things go wrong. But if I say we will do everything possible, for you and your family, and we mean it. So, these people will take a gamble and they will trust me. Again, as I said earlier in this program, trust is the foundation of any human relationship, and especially in espionage. And people trust me. One time I had some assets arrested, and we got first one out and then a second one out. And the third one, we kept trying to get out. Finally, it took former President Bush Sr., calling the president of this particular country and saying, these people did the right thing. You need to let this guy out. That's how powerful we can be. We can actually bring that kind of pressure on. And the person was released. But I didn't sleep well for that entire few months when this guy was in jail because I'd given commitments for his security. And we need to honor those. We have to honor those commitments. They have to be ironclad. It's sacred. It is a sacred commitment.
Did you trust them? I mean, they trusted you so much to give you that much.
They trusted me, and we got them out. We got them out. But you can imagine if you, Ahmed, made a commitment and then suddenly it looked like you weren't keeping your commitment, and you kept saying, no, I've got to keep my commitment. And so we got them out. The commitment was kept.
Wow. And what about you? Did you trust them? Because the level of work that they do for you is basically, okay, I'm talking from my personal idea. I mean, treason in general is the most and the biggest form of betrayal. So I can imagine that I would never trust someone professionally who, or even in personal life, who would knowingly do this job. I would never trust them, even if I recruit them.
Well, you have to. I mean, they're transferring their allegiance to you. And so you have to trust them because they trust you. I recruited the person I mentioned earlier that took me 10 years to recruit. After I recruited him, he went back to his home country and he was in his foreign ministry, and 9/11 happened, and he was watching those Twin Towers collapse, and he became very emotional. And his colleagues were looking at him strangely, and they said, well, why are you so upset? You're not an American. And he said, Jim, what they don't know is now I'm part of your team. He had transferred his allegiance. He had a new team. That was my team. And he became very emotional. We've had other people like that too. We recruited a foreign nuclear weapons designer, person with some key information. And anyways, there was he worked inside of his country for several years, and then we were going to resettle him and his family in America. And about that same time, there was a sports match going on between his country and the United States. And his country actually won this sports match. So as this man was getting on the airplane with his case officer handler, the case officer said, oh, by the way, I meant to congratulate you on the fact that your side won the sports match. And he looked at my friend and he said, no, you're wrong. My side lost, meaning he had already transferred his allegiance to America.
Okay. Now I understand how that works. So you probably believe in taking their... Have any of your assets ever betray you or become a double agent?
No, but I had a fellow case officer betray me. Okay. I don't know if you've ever heard of the name Ed Howard, but Ed Howard defected to the Soviet Union in 1985. He was an alcoholic. He had all kinds of problems, and he was fired from the CIA because of all of his drug and alcohol problems, and well, he did some other things that were pretty bad. But he defected to the Soviet Union. Well, Ed and I had been friends. I mean, we had eaten dinner in each other's homes. We'd go jogging together. We knew each other's families and things. And a CIA officer, when you go from one office to another office, CIA headquarters will do what they call a counterintelligence profile to see who have you been exposed to. This is which foreign services know about Jim Lawler. So I was going from one post to another post, and they sent me my counterintelligence profile, and on it said betrayed by the traitor Ed Howard. So I knew I had been betrayed to the KGB by my former friend, Ed Howard. How would you like that?
Must have been very hard to accept, yeah?
That was like a kick in the stomach. But I mean, I guess betrayed by the traitor Ed Howard.
What gave you, I mean, other than the thrill and other than the fun part of the job, what made you continue doing it? Like, what did you feel like really a success in doing this job, or it was a patriotic feeling? It was really an American thing?
It's both, but it's also a thrill. I mean, let's face it, what I was doing is I was breaking laws in other people's countries. Now, that sounds sociopathic, but it's a thrill. I mean, when you convince somebody to become a spy, or you do what we call a breaking and entering operation, an entry operation, I mean, you act like a criminal. You are a criminal at that other country's things. Well, that's a real rush for somebody like me. We jokingly say that people like me are sociopathic to a certain extent. In fact, I had a psychiatrist friend who once said, "Jim, you're nothing but a sociopath, but one within lanes. Those lanes are U.S. laws. I don't break U.S. laws." But yeah, I do things that are, they were a thrill. I tell people that are interested in careers in the CIA, how would you like a job where 19 mornings out of 20, you can't wait to get to work? That was my job. For 19 mornings out of 20, I couldn't wait to get to work. And when I interviewed in 1979 with the CIA, a mid-level officer took me to the CIA cafeteria and he bought me a Coke. And he said, "Jim, let me tell you how much fun this job is. Every 2 weeks, I'm always surprised that they pay me to do this." And I thought, I want a job like that. How many people can say they've got a job where I do this for free?
It's fun. I feel this way, honestly. I think I'm one of the luckiest people ever to wake up in the morning so excited to dress up and go and have conversations like this where I very much learn something new and enjoy, talk about other people, challenges, trying to help them a lot. And I think it's a big element of success in general in any kind of field is like really doing something that you like. But you're giving me what I feel like is a bit of, it's not confidential information. It is not classified information, but it's quite, I don't know how to describe it. Aren't you anyway concerned that you're giving me or talking about this information or putting it in books or your presentations? Because you're giving the gist of, I don't know, this profession.
Well, my stories, if you notice, I didn't mention the nationalities or the time or the place, but the techniques are as old as the Bible. I mean, espionage and the way and human motivations, that's all public knowledge. I was good at it, but it's nothing, really privileged information. It's just, this is how every intelligence service works. This is how the Russians or the Chinese or the Mossad or the Brits or the Germans, this is how they use the same techniques. I think we're really good at it. Some of us are, but that's, there's nothing classified about that. My commitment is to protect my sources. And so I never give a hint as to where they were or what their nationality is or anything like that. But people are people. People ask me sometimes, well, how would you work against a robot? And I said, well, I guess we'd have to take their batteries out. I don't know.
A question. It's really very common in all the movies or drama about spies and espionage and so on, and it's only a one-way in. You can never go out. If you're an operations officer, you stay as an operations officer forever. Is this a myth?
That's a myth. My dad, when I told him I was joining the CIA, he said that same thing. He says, if you join, you can never leave. I retired after 25 years, and I've continued to teach for another 20. But no, that's a myth. People, some of our assets decide at some point that they don't want to work for us anymore, and so that's fine. And sometimes they will go into like a hibernation or something for many years and then decide, I want to go back. I want to recontact the agency. And, maybe they've got access again to something, but it's a myth. If they want to quit, they quit. Nobody's forcing them to do this. And as far as myself, it's an addiction. It is really, running intelligence operations is an adrenaline booster. And I feel like we're adrenaline junkies. And so one of the reasons I write spy novels now is because I can no longer run operations, but I live through the characters in my novels, and I create these stories because they're based on real operations that I ran or I know that other people ran. And so I get a real adrenaline boost, a thrill from doing that. And it's not as good as running a real operation, but it's the next best thing.
Tell me about your books. Where can we get our hands on one of them?
Well, all of them are available on Amazon or Barnes & Noble. My first novel is called Living Lies. It's about the Iranian nuclear weapons program. And actually, if it was written 5 or 6 years ago, but if you read it, it's pretty close to what's going on now in many respects. So the second novel is called In the Twinkling of an Eye. And that's about a Russian and North Korean conspiracy to develop a genetic biological weapon for genetic genocide and for assassination. And then the third novel I wrote and released last year is called The Traitor's Tale. And that's about a CIA officer who's at the top of his game, but he's suspected of being a spy for the Russians, and how his friends treat him like a leper, as if he's got some contagious disease. And virtually everybody, except for a few people, abandon him. And anyways, he then decides to become a double agent and work, in essence, for the Russians, or you think he is. So that's called The Traitor's Tale. And all three of those under my name, James Lawler, are available on Amazon.
Thank you so much, James. And we will put the links below so that if anyone who would like to have a look at these amazing novels who are coming from an actual agent, operations officer who recruited spies for 25 years, you can have a look at it. One last question. Where, I don't know if you can say that, are you still in touch with any of your assets?
A couple of them, yes. Very carefully. People that I felt like, they were like brothers to me. In fact, one of them still signs off as your brother. He's very special to me. So, but not a lot. And before we stop, I also want to put in a promotion for a company that I'm a mentor and a senior advisor for, and that's a Swiss-based company called Brcidus Group, which is run by a dear friend of mine whom I've mentored for many, many years, Andre Bastar, and they are a business intelligence company based in Zurich, in New York City, and in Belgrade, and they have networks worldwide. And so that can be of tremendous interest to your clients or to yourself for litigation support. But I've been their senior mentor and senior advisor since the company was formed. I guess it was about 18 years ago.
What could be the services that they provide, and what kind of help they do?
They could provide due diligence. They can provide, let's say you have a client that's looking on acquiring another company, and they can then find out stuff that maybe the first company doesn't want you to know. They can, do market surveys. They have resources all over the world, networks. In fact, I think they have about 60 employees now, but they've got offices and contacts all over the world. And so, if you need to know what the other side is holding back. People always hold back stuff. Well, they're good at finding out what they're holding back and the things that you should be concerned about.
Absolutely. And thank you very much. And I think the best companies come from actual experience. So if you've been mentoring them after working with espionage all your life, so probably you can do the job very well.
They do the job extremely well.
Well, very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, Jem. I enjoyed a lot, and I think I learned a few new things and how close is your business to my business. And thank you very much.
Well, it was really an honor, Ahmed, to be on your program, and you had some excellent questions, and I hope this is of some interest to your listeners and viewers.
Thank you very much again. And next guest will probably not be a recruiter for Spies, but stay with us for next week.